Hey toy collectors, welcome to another super exciting, outrageous toy review. Today, we are taking a look at the G.I. Joe Street Fighter II Ryu figure. In the 1990s, Hasbro released two different Street Fighter lines. One was a sub-team of G.I. Joe and was based on the Capcom's fighting game. The other line was based on the Street Fighter movie and was not officially G.I. Joe figures, although they used the same construction and many of the same parts. No Ryu figure was released for the movie line, although one was planned. Before we dig into the figure, here is a quick look at Ryu in the package. Ryu was one of the first Street Fighter figures I got from the G.I. Joe line as a kid. I was very excited that Hasbro was releasing Street Fighter figures. I was also disappointed that they didn't look exactly like their characters. Ryu is not a bad representation. I think he looks decent. Like, you could easily see him wearing this outfit because it's basically his outfit with sleeves and with boots. So you could believe that, like, in a tournament, he might actually have had these at some point, or like a more formal version of his outfit. It definitely feels more like Ryu than some of the figures, but it is not perfect. Ryu is made up of a brand new head for this figure, and the body of a G.I. Joe Ninja Force character, Slice, the Cobra Ninja. Many corners were cut on this Street Fighter line. I bet Hasbro spent a decent amount of money on the license and therefore wanted to make the figures inexpensively and wanted to work in all the cool ninja actions they had created for Ninja Force. When you think about all the cost-cutting measures they took on this Street Fighter line, I'm almost amazed they made such an intricate paint mask here for his boots. All the figures in the Street Fighter line either came with spring-loaded missile launchers or had a Ninja Force action feature built into them. Ryu has this uppercut, which works really well for him because in the game he's got the uppercut move. And that was one of the probably better action features built into these guys. So many of them reused an action feature that didn't necessarily work for their character. So at least the Dragon Punch or whatever this particular maneuver was called for the figure's packaging works out really well for him. The figure has articulation at the head. It is just a swivel. They do not have the 1985 look-around feature that many characters do. I also think it's a little interesting that this head is very similar to a character that already existed in G.I. Joe, Quick Kick, but they didn't choose to use that, especially because I guess Quick Kick's head wouldn't interact with this type of torso because his head has the 85 ball and socket. Down below, he's got a white gi with a black belt, which actually has cloth belts on it. His arms are all in white with black gloves. He has a little sai on one wrist and a shuriken on the other. As a kid, I really wish they would have at least painted his hands flesh color, which would have matched the package, just because in the game he doesn't wear sleeves at all. His waist is very plain. It does not rotate as normal. The G.I. Joe Street Fighter characters and the Ninja Force characters had little barbs inside their waists that keep them from rotating. I believe it was something to help with activating the action feature. They didn't want a kid to pull back on the arm and have the waists rotate. Below that, he's got standard G.I. Joe hips and knees. So he has a really nice range of motion for a karate-themed character, and his action feature only affects one arm, so he really is a nice figure as far as not being hindered by his built-in gimmick. The Street Fighter characters all came with an array of weapons. These were repaints or remolds of weapons that mostly came with Ninja Force characters. He has a set of these guys. I don't know what you call them. They're kind of like sais. You know, they're blocking weapons for parrying. He has a sickle weapon. He has a couple of swords. This longsword, I always really liked this sculpt here and used this a lot for characters. He's got a shorter sword here as well, which is not a bad sword, but the thick blade I never thought was quite as cool. He's got this awesome knife with such a huge wide blade and the knuckle guard. I thought this was kind of a cool weapon as well. And he also comes with a battle axe, which I think is maybe slightly ridiculous for Ninja. His final accessory is a blue figure stand. All of these items came molded onto a tree and also came with other characters from Ninja Force and Street Fighter. As a side note for G.I. Joe fans, this figure actually works really well if you wanted to pretend he was Storm Shadow without his mask. He's dressed in all white, which is typical for Storm Shadow. I think it works really well. As a kid, my friends and I were obsessed with these figures. I vividly remember sitting on the swings at my elementary playground, talking to my friends about these figures and how much we wanted certain characters and how we would have changed certain characters if we could have. I, for one, really wished they had had access to Quick Kick's mold for this figure, because to me, if he could have had the lower half of Quick Kick, he could have been amazing. Quick Kick is a classic G.I. Joe figure from 1985, one of the high points in the G.I. Joe series. He is a ninja with bare feet, just like Ryu in the video game. So if they could have used his legs, it would have made Ryu 10% more screen accurate. I'm not sure what the internal workings are like for the arm. I don't know whether his shoulder has some sort of special gearing to it, but I also really wish they could have used Dice's arms for this character. He has these cool wrist guards that actually look a lot like the wrist guards that Ryu and Ken use in the Street Fighter video game. Granted, he does have this little patch over here on his upper arm that wouldn't be accurate to Ryu, but I think having the bare arms with these wrist guards would be much more accurate than having the full sleeves and gloves. Again, I'm not sure, maybe this action feature wouldn't have worked. There might be something special about the top of this arm, whereas Dice's action feature is built into his waist. I know those are minor complaints, but as a kid, I was very much into making custom G.I. Joe action figures. I used to buy figures for $1 all the time at yard sales and flea markets, take the screws out of their backs, mix around the parts, and make cool new characters or new versions of characters. And I kind of always wanted to do that with the Street Fighter figures, but unfortunately, the Ninja Force guys do not have screws in their backs, so I would have had to have broken a Ryu to get the parts apart, and there would have been no way to put them back together then. So because I think his head and torso are great, there was no way of switching the arms or the legs and still putting them back together. That I knew how to do at least at that point in time. I could probably now split this torso open with an X-Acto knife and just glue it back together once I switched out the parts to the way I wanted to, but I'm just not really into custom figure making as much as I used to be. But I think there was some really great potential here, and I think the movie version that was planned for Ryu was pretty decent looking, you know, as far as being much more screen accurate. Unfortunately, he just never got released. The other thing my friends and I always discussed at recess was they could have thrown out all of these accessories if they included a single blue energy sphere that was made out of some sort of translucent plastic. That would have looked awesome to represent his fireball. Of course, they didn't do that back then, even though we had the idea. Nowadays, that kind of accessory or energy effects are very common with action figures and would have made this guy even cooler. If you haven't seen the video I did on the Street Fighter line with my buddy Kieran, make sure you check that out. It's a pretty good overview of the entire line. Thanks for watching this SEO Toy review. Make sure to like and leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you think about Ryu.